My name is Stacy Rothgeb. I'm an MBA student at the University of Denver. I'm talking about the session, Great Employee Experience, It's Remotely Possible. This was a panel discussion with, it was a variety of people that did both domestic but mostly international work, and they had a lot of different experience related to both hybrid, human resources, so people management, and one person, Jessica Reeder, was with Upworks, which was kind of an interesting perspective where it's a consultant looking at, how to engage your workforce. So basically, this is a common theme in South by this year I can see is everyone's talking about like post-COVID, what do we do now? And hybrid working or remote working has become much more popular and common, and many more people are experiencing it. This panel had a very interesting perspective because most of them had already been dealing with a remote workforce prior to the pandemic. And so a lot of the discussion was how they were transferring their learnings from that and how it's evolved as such a high percentage of the population has gone to remote work. So some of the things that were discussed during it that I found particularly interesting, one was when you are talking about a hybrid workforce, especially one or a remote workforce that is has a lot of global impact. Let me rephrase that again. When you were talking about a workforce that is outside of the United States, you cannot make assumptions. A more international workforce, and it's like and I think I would actually expand that to not all communities, even in the United States, you can make these assumptions that working from home means that they have a dedicated space to work in, that they have reliable internet or even reliable power. You don't understand what their childcare situations are, so they may have these distractions. So it was an interesting concept to think about that you need to provide a workplace for your remote workers, because you cannot assume that they bring to the table these things that I think in America we think are just given, this reliable power, reliable internet, and reliable housing. One of the other big takeaways from this conversation, it was interesting because they talked a little bit about the technology, and it was interesting to hear this particular panel default to remote work. It's like, and they specifically said that, a lot of people feel like, they could say that, when you come in one day a week, you create better networking and you get increased collaboration, but there's actually no research to prove this. And so it was the perspective was presented that if you are, even if you're in the office and some of the people in a meeting are remote, that everyone should default to remote. So like, even if you're sitting at a conference table, everyone should be on their Zoom call with their video in front of them. So it puts everyone on equal field. I really can relate to this. I know that in my workplace, we are dealing with a lot of hybrid work environments, and I'm very concerned with inclusivity. I'm very concerned that folks that aren't in the room may not have an equal strength in their opinions and voices heard. But I think it goes both ways. What I've observed is like, so often you have chatting going on in your team's chat, and that conversation isn't seen by the folks in the room. So in that way, the people in the room are being excluded from the conversation. And so I think this is something that we need to be really sensitive to. And so it was great to hear these other perspectives on it. What I did find some encouragement out of this, because I can't say that anything was really new. It's like a lot of the things that they were recommending as best practices are best practices that me and my organization have come to on our own over time. And one of them is that idea that it is acceptable and maybe encouraged to spend that first 5 minutes of a call just chit-chatting. Some of it is because we're on back-to-back calls and you need to allow time for people to all get on there, so we're starting it together. But a lot of it is that value of the relationship. And maybe that is the one big takeaway I had from this conversation, was that it's almost more important to invest in that team building and that relationship building, and making sure you have a personal connection with each of the people on your team when you're working in a remote environment. And it's because you have to be more intentional about creating time for those conversations and for that relationship building, where if you were in person, you'd run into them in the hallway or something like that in the lunchroom, and you would naturally have those conversations. You have to make time for it in a virtual world. And they even talked more about how the strength, in some ways it makes your relationships stronger because you have to have so much intentionality for that. So how does this impact me? I would say that, I decided to attend this session because I lead people, and I do work with, I do spend a lot of time, as you probably have gathered, thinking about like, how are we ensuring that we are inclusive, and how are we ensuring that we have the most productive work environment when we have so many different situations right now, whether at home or remote. And I think mostly this impacted me because it reinforced what I had already knew, or what I've already learned through my coursework. So sometimes it's good to hear and I applied what I know very much to a domestic situation. We don't do a lot of international work, so it was very interesting to hear that maybe, if we did do international work, there is that different perspective that you need to take in, that like anytime you're working with a demographic that is not your own, that you need to be very open and not assume, and really understand what the constraints are.